While I was sitting and waiting at the medical professional's place of business, I became conscious of the fact that the air was permeated by the scent of antiseptic. I also became aware of the muted buzzing sound that was coming from the fluorescent lights that were positioned above my head at the same moment. I was sitting in the waiting room when my phone rang. As soon as I noticed that the caller was Angela, I took notice. She was the only female child that I had ever been responsible for bringing into the world. I had raised her with all of the love and sacrifice that I was capable of giving, yet as she talked, there was something in her voice that made my stomach tighten into a knot. I have already sold both your beach house and your automobile. We will be departing for Europe tomorrow, and we will be away from here for a significant amount of time. For our purposes, being in possession of the financial resources was of the highest importance. Prior to the connection being abruptly severed without any sort of advance notice, the last item that was transmitted was, "Goodbye." There is no necessity to present a rationale in this scenario. There is an unmistakable absence of flexibility. There is not one indication that the small kid, who would scream and grab my hand with her tiny hands if she got a cut on her knee, exists. She placed a phone call that lasted just 2 minutes, and all that I had worked toward for more than 45 years, all of the things that I had sacrificed, cooked, cleaned, and brought into my home, was obliterated. For a short period of time, I was under the notion that I was on the verge of experiencing an emotional breakdown and that I was about to break down in tears. I was holding the phone tightly in my fingers, but instead of bursting into tears, I found myself overtaken with an unusual feeling of peace. I contorted my mouth into a smile that was essentially frosty. It is Angela's belief that she disposed of me in the same manner that a person would dispose of waste material. With that being stated, she was unaware of the fact that I had been prepared for this specific point in life through ways that she would not have been able to dream about, let alone imagine. I had always believed that I had a thorough grasp of my daughter, but it wasn't until that moment that I became aware of how wrong that assumption was. I'm Antonia Brooks, and I'm 71 years old. My status as a widow has been in effect for half a year. Robert was the only man I had ever fallen in love with, and his untimely death, which occurred as we were sitting down together to have breakfast, was particularly shocking because he died of a heart attack. My spouse was he. The greeting that he would give every morning was, "Good morning, my love." Those words that sound so familiar to me. He would whisper after planting a kiss on my forehead. On that particular day as well, he performed exactly the same actions. The exact words that he uttered to me were the very last words that he ever spoke to me, and they were spoken at the exact moment that he bent forward and broke the coffee cup on the floor. It had always been my assumption that the situation was that way, but in actuality, Angela had proven to be far more present than I had given her credit for. She would come over 3 times a week to help me with errands such as grocery shopping, attend my medical appointments with me, and remind me to go in for a checkup. After all, I needed to start looking out for my well-being more effectively now that I was living on my own. She was the picture of the compliant daughter. She smiled and gave me hugs and kisses. However, it was during that period that I became aware of the fact that all of this had been nothing more than a matter of convenience. She kept her true objectives hidden beneath the veneer that she put up for everyone to see. We had always been able to retreat to our sanctuary, our place of refuge, but she sold the beach house without even consulting me. We were required to give up every imaginable thing and pool together every last cent of money that we possessed. We went to all of this trouble so that our family would have a place to live where memories could be developed and preserved. It was during that specific moment in time when Angela was 15 years old. Summers that were crowded with birthdays and Christmases, laughter, Angela bringing her boyfriends and finally her husband Edward, and me cooking for everyone, wiping the sand from the floors, folding an infinite amount of laundry, and still joyful because my family was together. Wood and plaster were not the only elements that were used in the construction of that building. Our history was incorporated into it as well. But from Angela's perspective, it was only valuable in that it would generate money. As for the vehicle, the Ford pickup that was a particular favorite of Robert's, he had treated it as if it were his own child, washing it every Sunday, changing the oil as if it were a religious ceremony, and parking it in the same shaded location by the tree. The cologne he had worn had infiltrated the leather upholstery of the vehicle, and its aroma had not gone as of yet. In the glove compartment, his music albums were placed in an orderly fashion, and I could still sense that he had been there. She went ahead and sold it even though she was fully aware of the importance of that particular item to me. While I was sitting on that green plastic chair in that waiting area that was bursting at the seams with people, I did not shed a single tear. In contrast, there were several people who were blowing their noses into tissues, and there were many others who were staring blankly at the television that was hung on the wall. I remembered another thing that I had left in the back of my mind at that same instant. Prior to his passing, he presented me with a manila folder. This occurred 3 days before his death. He made the directive for Antonia to place the thing in issue inside the drawer of the dresser, his face displaying a solemn look. Whenever you believe that the time is appropriate, you are free to open it if something should happen to me. I had completely forgotten that it had ever existed, since I had buried it in my sorrow after the funeral. At that particular point in time I had a recall of it, but it was confined to a whisper at the back of my mind. The nurse summoned me by calling out my name at the very moment that the doctor was giving me a summary of my health, which was satisfactory for my age, and recommended that I focus on getting some rest and modifying my diet. Due to the fact that my attention was focused on something else, I gave a nod that did not indicate that I was paying attention. I observed the city whizzing by while I was riding the bus on my way back home. I was able to observe that the inhabitants of the dwellings were each burdened with their own individual tragedies and secrets. My daughter was under the impression that she had not left me any presents, but Robert had always been the type of person who prepared arrangements for the days that would come. As soon as I stepped through the door of my house, I headed straight to the bedroom, opened the drawer, and there it was. The envelope, just as I had left it, waiting for me like a ghost from the past. When I took it into my hands, my body was racked with uncontrollable shaking. In the front, my name was written in the calligraphy style of Robert. There was nothing that differed from previous times. It was just as consistent and unblemished. While sitting on the bed that my spouse and I had been sharing for a total of 45 years, I opened it up. Meanwhile, the shadows that were cast by the darkness continued to creep across the walls. Inside the packet, there were various pieces of paperwork, including legal deeds, certificates from banks, and documents that, at first, I found impossible to make any sense of. A message written by hand was also present. At the instant that I began to unroll it, it seemed as though the words were coming to life and moving around. It felt as though I could hear Robert's voice speaking to me from within the scroll. If you are reading this, my dearest Antonia, it means that I am no longer with you. I apologize for not sharing everything to you. I wanted to protect you from it, so I kept my silence. Over the years, I have invested our savings in both residential and business buildings. We are the owners of a wide range of properties, one of which is the beach house. We have equity interests in a wide variety of businesses as well as financial accounts that contain more money than you could possibly imagine. Additionally, there are 6 other properties that are in our possession. You are affluent beyond any measure, my darling. Written language provides evidence of the fact that you have been affluent for as long as you can remember. Unless and until the proper time comes, please refrain from disclosing this information to Angela. She would change if she were cognizant of it. I could sense the beating of my heart quickening in my chest as I kept going through the pages. I distinctly remember thinking to myself, I would prefer that she love us for the people that we are rather than for what we own. My husband, who was a reserved bus driver, would return home every day with smiles that were completely exhausted and feet that were in pain. In silence, he had set out to construct an empire for himself little by little. He had taken every single coin and every single sacrifice that he had made and had converted them into a fortune that he had buried away in a place where it could not be discovered. I am presently in ownership of all the properties. This includes the condominium located in the central business district, the little hotel that is located on the shoreline, the apartment complex that functioned as the dwelling for Angela and Edward, and every other home. I took hold of the pages because it felt as though my hands were being burnt. The ink was rendered blurry by my tears. This stemmed not only from my ordeal but also from the realization that I had just been enlightened about. I was unaware at that specific instant in time of the fact that the procedure of removing my clothing had not yet been completed by Angela. She was certain that she had stolen everything away from her, but this belief turned out to be false because she did not know that Robert had already given her the chance to recover everything that had been taken from her. That evening, I went around the rooms of my home, letting my fingers slide across the aged pieces of furniture that Angela had made fun of in the past. I also had a look at photographs of my family members. I paid special attention to the picture of her as a youngster, when she was 5 years old and laughing while sitting on Robert's lap. At that hour, where could the identity of that young woman be found? When had she reached the point in time at which she would be prepared to forsake the soul of her mother for the sake of monetary gain? Early the following morning, the phone rang one more time before it stopped making noise. The name Angela is a name that is commonly bestowed upon girls. Her voice carried a softer tone this time, and the false compassion that permeated every word that she spoke was impossible to miss. "Mother, the money from the sale of the house and the car has been deposited into your account," I informed her of the situation. "It's not a lot of money, but it will be of assistance to you until you are able to locate something that is less expensive. This is my portion. 30% of the things that I own." "How kind of you," she responded in a respectful manner. "When do you plan to leave, my love?" I inquired. Later on in the very same afternoon, I made the declaration. "Perhaps even longer, maybe 6 months." I couldn't help but burst into a smile when she finished the phone conversation after I had communicated to her my wish that she would have a wonderful vacation. I hadn't laughed this hard since Robert passed away. It had been a long time since I had laughed with such intensity. The situation was absurdly stupid. She was absolutely certain that I was unable to defend myself, that I had been forsaken, and that I was in a precarious financial situation. She did not have any knowledge of the fact that I was in possession of all of the cards. It was her belief that she had left me in a state of devastation, but the reality is that all she had accomplished was rekindling a portion of my being that I had forgotten was there. While I was sitting down at the kitchen table with the envelope that belonged to Robert spread out in front of me, I made a commitment to myself at that particular moment that I would remain silent. If my daughter were to acquire a wish to do me wrong, were she to acquire a wish to forsake me for the sake of money, she would then be obliged to discover the actual nature of treachery. She would need to come to the realization that I was not the frail senior citizen that she had assumed me to be. I was the wife of Robert, a woman who had been sculpted by her experiences with grief, sacrifice, and tenacity. My name was Antonia Brooks when I was born. Immediately after I had begun my journey, I was detained. I had scarcely embarked on my journey when Angela began to believe that the end of my search was already in sight. In reality, she was seeing the beginning of a chapter that was beyond the bounds of her imagination. I folded the letter that I had received from Robert with great care, placed it back into the envelope, and cradled the envelope securely next to my chest. In the stillness of the room, I was able to perceive that Robert was in the same space as I was. For a long time I viewed myself as an ordinary person, a typical housewife who cooked and cleaned, took care of other people, and got old in silence. I was cognizant of the fact that Robert had a very high opinion of me at that particular period in time. He bestowed onto me the knowledge, riches, and influence that he held because he placed his faith in me. The instant that the opportunity presented itself, he was without a doubt confident that I possessed the ability to step up to the plate. I poured a cup of coffee for myself and sat down at the table in the kitchen first thing the next morning. It was as if the papers were a map that would guide me to an eventuality that I had not foreseen, so I cast a peek in their direction. They were scattered all over the wood. Even while both Edward and Angela thought that they had left me in a vulnerable position, the reality was that they had left me with possession of an empire of which they were ignorant. I responded with a smile to the idea that had just come into my thoughts. It was not because of any ill feelings that this happened. Rather, it was due to the fact that I was experiencing a great sensation of personal satisfaction at that particular moment. It was the first time since Robert had passed away that I felt as though my life had vitality and purpose. Following her decision to select what she wanted, my daughter left the responsibility of making the decision up to me. First things first, I called the phone number of Mr. Peterson, who formerly held the position of agent for Robert. He was present at the burial, expressed his emotions of grief to me, and recommended that I contact him if I ever required any type of help at any point in time. The moment as he picked up the phone, I immediately spoke to Mr. Peterson in a collected manner, stating, "I am in desperate need of a conversation with you." My hands were shaking when I dialed his number. His tone shifted dramatically the moment that he made any allusion to the fact that he had obtained possession of a small number of documents that were the property of Robert. "Of course, Mrs. Brooks." Because I was unable to fall asleep, the majority of that evening was spent lying in bed wide awake. I had a recollection of someone telling me, "Come by tomorrow morning." In my dream, Robert was sitting in his chair of choice with his newspaper nicely folded on his lap. He approached the subject with the patience that he was known for and gave voice to his thoughts by saying, "I think that it is about time that you got out of bed." The following morning, I was determined to put on clothes that were more neatly put together than any that I had worn for several months. The dress that I put on was colored like wine. The one that Robert used to remark made me look like I had a feeling of refinement. After that, I played around with my hair until I could no longer recognize the woman who was looking back at me in the mirror. Despite the fact that everything was going on around her, she remained composed. She was not left to fend for herself in the least bit. She was biding her time in a patient manner till anything came to pass. I was received with a welcoming greeting as soon as I stepped into Mr. Peterson's office. Marble flooring and high ceilings were features of the historical structure that housed the office. Nonetheless, he was caught aback by the fact that I laid the envelope on his desk, and he looked up with surprise in his eyes as his eyebrows lifted. With every one of the documents that he examined, his eyes grew increasingly wide. This is absolutely incredible, Brooks," he finally remarked. His voice was virtually reverent in tone. Intelligence was a quality that Robert possessed in plenty. "According to these documents, you are the owner of a variety of assets, bank accounts, and investments. Do you have any idea how much value the things that you possess have?" My heart was hammering violently in my chest, but I appeared to be calm by nodding gently. "What I need to figure out," I replied, "is what my options are when it comes to legal matters. How can I protect the things that belong to me? How can I ensure that this stays under wraps until the appropriate time comes?" Mr. Peterson provided them with every detail with precision. The firms were above board, and the accounts were functioning. The documentation were real. I was the sole beneficiary of the entire estate. He substantiated what I had assumed, which is an even more important revelation. The sale of the beach house was not official. Angela did not have the right to take such action, and selling it was not something that was within the scope of her responsibilities. "We have the authority to immediately void the sale," he said to reporters. After shaking my head and maintaining eye contact with him, I stated, "Not only that, but we even have the authority to file charges for fraud." In my opinion, that is not the case. At this point in time, I have no desire to take any action that is legally binding. I desire silence and quietude. I have a desire to be in command. If all of the tasks could be performed inconspicuously and without attracting attention to themselves, it would be greatly appreciated. Would it be beyond your capacity to achieve that for me? He checked me over from head to toe and then nodded his head after lingering for a time. "I absolutely understand," he said. "You are my client." I had the idea that I had been sleeping for several months after I departed from his office, and I had the feeling that I had finally woken up. The streets outside had transformed from how they had been in the past, and they now emanated a feeling of vitality and animation. By that point in time, I had devised a plan. It was as if there was a concealed flame smoldering within me. The people who were outside continued to see me as the impoverished widow who had been abandoned by her own daughter, even as my life took a strange turn in the weeks that followed, as if I were living two separate lives at once. I greeted the people I passed with a smile as I made my way to the market, but my smile did not betray the storm that was brewing within me. "Antonia, did Angela go to Europe and leave you all by yourself? Is it true like that?" Aurora, who has been my neighbor for as long as I can remember, asked me in a soft voice. "Yes, but I will be all right," I would reply, nodding and smiling gently. People approached me with their condolences and reassurances, and because their feelings of pity provided the perfect cover-up, I let them do that. I was, on the other hand, meeting with Mr. Peterson in secret in order to sign paperwork, get my belongings, and uncover the true depth of Robert's hidden brilliance. My astonishment became deeper and deeper as I continued to unearth additional details. Not only was the apartment building in which Angela lived a desirable property, but it was also situated in a neighborhood that was undergoing a time of fast expansion, and the cost of rent was increasing annually. Edward had not been aware of the fact that he did not own the flat. He had even gone so far as to use it as collateral for debts that he had taken out. At night, I found myself laughing out loud as I envisioned him signing papers with false assurance, utterly unaware that the earth beneath him did not belong to him. After his demise, Robert continued to emerge victorious in the battle of wits, even in death. Peterson contacted Mr. one afternoon to share some unbelievable news that he had just learned. "Mr.," he said, "Mrs. The beach house is once again yours, Brooks. It has been returned to you. We were able to demonstrate to the buyers that the deal was a fraud, and they eventually returned it to us. They were able to recover their money because they did not owe any money to anyone. It is in your name again," I said to him. After that, I closed my eyes, took a long breath, and felt all the stress leave my body. I was the owner of the little cream-colored home near the ocean once again. When Robert was younger, he made fish frying there his pastime, and Angela built sandcastles there. I came to the conclusion that I would go and take a look at it. I got on the bus and took my usual seat, which is next to the window. I have completed this particular task with Robert a significant number of times in the past. As soon as I got off at my stop, I had the feeling that my chest was being compressed. The garden that Robert had planted and the veranda that looked out over the ocean were precisely the same as I remembered them. As soon as I arrived at the residence, I was greeted by an elderly man with a look of wonder on his face. He asked the question in a manner that was well-mannered. "Are you all right, ma'am?" I started to smile. "Yes, it is accurate." He moved his head up and down in agreement without being aware of the reality, and I went away with tears streaming in my eyes. My sole thought was, "I'm just remembering." I had reclaimed not just the house but also the memories that she had felt were completely wiped. She had reduced all of those summers, birthdays, and Christmases to mere bucks, but I had retrieved all of that time back. I contacted Mr. Peterson once more that evening. "There is another thing that we need to take into consideration," I said with unwavering conviction. "That truck is in Robert's possession." He sighed before stating, "I would like to experience that again. It is going to be more difficult to deal with this situation. After Robert passed away, you signed a power of attorney for Angela. I became unhappy because of her legitimate use of it to sell the truck. I have a vague memory of signing some paperwork that Angela had placed in front of me. These documents were for the management of the matters that were related to the funeral. I was overcome with grief and misery, so I signed without taking the time to read everything. Since the very inception of the situation, she had been devising this plan to betray her companions. Is there any approach I may take in order to prove that I was deceived?" I asked him about it. Mr. Peterson remembered. "Yes," he replied. "We will succeed if we give it some time," I assured him. "Whatever it takes, you need to do it," I urged him. I fulfilled my obligations on a daily basis. I was the destitute widow who was unable to defend herself early in the morning, and who inspired the compassion of the people in her neighborhood. I was an entrepreneur in the afternoons who gained knowledge of properties, investments, and legal terms that I had not previously been interested in. As I expanded my knowledge, I felt a greater sense of strength within myself. Robert left me a fortune, but he also left me a set of instruments, which was much more significant. Edward and Angela thought that they had stolen all of the items, but in reality, they had only exposed themselves. They thought that I did not have any other courses of action available to me, but in reality, I possessed far more influence than either of them could have ever imagined. I came to the realization that power is most effective when it is used quietly. I have completed an exhaustive inspection of the electrical wiring in the house, Smith, and I am pleased to report that I have found everything to be in perfect working order. The vehicle has returned, Brooks. I was acquainted with the individual who completed the purchase. I couldn't help but smile when I imagined that after I had explained the situation to him, Robert's ghost had nodded its approval and had agreed to return it in exchange for a small payment, I said. That is wonderful news, you said. There is one thing left for you to take care of, I said. What could it possibly be? You asked. He queried. It is a notice to evacuate the property. After a pause in the conversation, the line was silent, and then, for my daughter and her husband, was said. Mrs. Brooks, is that really what you want to do? I asked in a chilly tone that expressed my complete and utter agreement. She treated me like I was worthless, just like junk that is being thrown away. After all this time, she will finally get to understand what it is like to have the very basis that she stands on taken away from her. There was a little silence before Mr. Peterson gently commented, Okay then, we will make sure that it is ready. Would you prefer to have this delivered at this time? I responded in a voice that was level. The statement, at this moment that has not yet occurred, is an indication that you ought to postpone any further action until she returns from her excursion to Europe. I would like her to get it in person. Aurora came to my door after a few days had gone by, barging in with a sense of urgency in her voice and a lot of speech. She approached me in a hurry and asked, Antonia, have you heard what's going on? Is Edward dealing with a challenging situation at the bank right now? It is his place of employment. It would seem that he took out loans using the apartment as collateral, but the title is not in his name. I suppressed my smile by concealing it behind a facade of worry. The bank is absolutely fuming, I stated to myself. Is that so? I posed the question. Is that so? Moreover, that is certainly not the only aspect. I was informed of the issue, and I became aware of the fact that Angela did not know anything about it. He committed fraud against her, falsified her signature, and now the bank is looking to get answers from her. My immediate response was, excellent, when I heard that she was coming back from Europe with the intention of cleaning up the mess, as some people have claimed. When my daughter returned from her adventure to Europe, she had a sense of humiliation and failure. She had forsaken me for the man that she loved, but after he had abandoned her as well, she was now stuck in a situation that was very pitiful. That evening, I walked outside to sit on the porch and whisper to Robert while gazing up at the sky. My dearest, that is happening as we speak. You have found a method that yields positive results. She was completely certain that she had left me penniless, yet you gave me with all the things that I needed. And now she will be able to learn something new, he commented in reply. For the first time in several months, I fell into a deep sleep. It was as if the stars had been listening to the sound of my voice, and they were now glowing with a much more intense and brilliant light than they had been before. The following morning early, Mr. Peterson verified that the report was accurate. Your daughter made her way to the airport independently after she had finished her excursion, no matter where it was she had gone. Edward was the only person who stayed behind in Europe. Everyone else departed. I nodded my head in order to accept the authenticity of the claims that a fight had taken place. Edward never backed down from a confrontation because he did not lack courage. And what about the letter? He asked. I was informed an hour ago that I was going to be evicted. She responded. It has been delivered. I started to feel my heart quicken as I imagined the expression on her face, the dread, and the incredulity that she must have felt. I brewed a cup of tea for myself and then took a seat by the window to wait. I was confident that the phone would begin ringing at any moment. The end I proved to be accurate. It was 8 o'clock in the morning when the telephone rang. The voice that answered the call was that of Angela. She was speaking in a trembling and desperate tone. Mom, I need to speak with you about something important immediately following that. I received a letter in the mail today. According to the contents of this notice, I am under the impression that I have a time frame of 30 days to vacate my current place of abode. It is necessary to have an error somewhere in the procedure. Do you have any knowledge regarding this issue? Before I said anything in answer, I took a slow, pleasurable drink of my tea. Is this a notification that I must leave the building? From whom can it be that they are keeping it away from? Robert Investments, Inc. is the name of this business, which is also commonly referred to as the corporation. I do not have any familiarity with this organization. I did my best to keep my voice from shaking, but the moment she heard the name, it seemed to shock her as if she had been struck by lightning. Angela is struggling to catch her breath as she responds. No, sweetie, I don't have a clue who they are. Please, Mom, I don't know what to do, she says. I convey my confusion, then let the pause that follows stretch out before speaking with a soft voice, saying, I do not understand this. At this very moment, I am very sorry, darling. Where exactly am I? You are at my home. That being said, I am unaware of how much longer this will continue to be the case. Is it all right if I come see you, Mother? Her remarks were deeply hurtful to me. They were not painful because they were accurate, but rather because of the irony that they carried. I don't have any other family members, she explained. I replied in a voice that was soft and kind. Of course, my love, you are free to come and go whenever it is most convenient for you to do so, according to your own schedule. The game kicked off with full intensity at that very same time. Angela, my daughter, was on her way to return to the mother she thought she had caused irrevocable damage to. However, she did not know that the same woman she had tried to forsake had meticulously plotted out every step of her demise. She was absolutely oblivious of the fact that the lady she had wanted to get rid of was the one who had orchestrated every step of her downfall, and while I waited for her to appear in my kitchen, I practiced the mask that I would wear. I was really surprised by how different Angela looked when she came up at my door an hour later. My daughter, who had always been so proud of herself, had a shift in her attitude. She had always moved around dressed in gorgeous apparel and had spoken with confidence, but now she stood before me looking pale and emaciated. The fancy dress that she was wearing was crumpled up, as if she had been sleeping in it during her trip back, and her hair, which had once been glossy, was now a mess of tangles. I nearly saw the little girl that she used to be, frightened and confused, but then I remembered the cold, callous voice that had sold my house and automobile without a second thought. I let her step inside after I softened my expression, spread my arms wide, and allowed my look to become softer. For a brief period of time, she clung to me in an uncomfortable way, as though she was not convinced that she was worthy of comfort and support. Mother, she said, her voice scratchy, I apologize for the manner in which I departed. Assuming the role of the compassionate but fatigued widow, that is what I did. I said gently to her, Darling, it's behind us now, as I led her over to the kitchen table. With her palms pressed on the board, she sat down and her hands were shaking. It was in that instant that she appeared small, almost like a child. She prepared herself a cup of coffee and then began drinking it while she told her story of her tribulations, which included Edward leaving her in Europe, her discovery of the enormous debt that he had left behind, and the fact that the banks were now pursuing her. She was forced to face the consequences of her own actions after every single word that she uttered became a blade of betrayal. She had left me to be with him, and now, as a kind of revenge for her previous actions, he has abandoned her as well. Even though fate had supplied what I consider to be the perfect justice, I did not express my satisfaction. I simply listened, shaking my head and letting out sympathetic sighs, allowing her to continue holding the impression that I was an ineffective old woman who could only offer consolation. Nevertheless, as soon as I was inside, my mind had already turned to what I should do next. Angela went back to the bedroom where she had spent her nights during her entire youth, which was the room with the faded pink wallpaper and the old photographs that had been taken when she was a teenager. She returned to this room in the days that followed. I watched her as she went through the process of unpacking 2 bags and a cardboard box, both of which were the final vestiges of her former life, which had been full of extravagance. She maintained her silence in spite of the embarrassment that continued to follow her about like a shadow. Folding clothes, preparing modest meals, and assisting with chores were all mundane activities that she carried out as though they were small acts of atonement for her. One evening, she made her way into the kitchen with a manila envelope in her possession. "Mom," she said with an inquisitive tone in her voice, "before I left the apartment, I came across this in Edward's belongings." I looked at the letter, and as soon as I discovered that it was written in Robert's handwriting, I gasped. "It has your name written on it," and my pulse began to race in my chest. "One additional envelope is needed." I was well aware of the fact that Angela was watching me as I slowly and carefully opened it. I discovered a note that was brief as well as a tiny key within. Robert had composed a letter that was addressed to Antonia and contained the following text. "Antonia, if you are reading this after the first envelope, it means that Angela is in trouble. This key is the one that will allow you to access the number 247 safe deposit box at the central bank," I said to her as I struggled to comprehend what was going on within me. My breathing became shallow. "Inside is something that will be beneficial to her, but she must exercise caution when using it," I said to her. Even from beyond the dead, Robert had the foresight to predict that this was going to happen. Angela approached more closely so that she could get a better view. She was filled with optimism. A safe deposit box is a secure storage unit found within a bank or other financial institution that is used to store valuable items. Another secret that had been kept by Father. It may include something that is valuable or something that could potentially be of some use to us, Mother. She made a plea, saying, "Please, let's go tomorrow." Her longing was almost unbearably painful to see, but I kept up my pretense of reluctance. She gripped my hand tightly and said, "I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe the smartest thing to do would be to leave things the way they are," I said. "Mom, please. There is nothing else that I have to give," I implored. "Even if the chances of there being anything there are not very high, we must give it a shot," I added as I shook my head slowly in accord. She breathed out a sigh of relief, entirely oblivious to the fact that I already had more than enough resources available to me to address her concerns. One component of the lesson that she needed to learn was to permit her to maintain her faith in the possibility that a miracle could occur. We went to the bank to take care of some business together the next day. As she gave the key to Angela, her hands were shaking. We were escorted into a room with doors made of metal by the cashier. It was quite quiet. I couldn't keep my eyes from widening in reaction to the image that was in front of me the moment that I opened up the box. Within the room, there was a collection of jewelry consisting of necklaces, rings, bracelets, and heirlooms from Robert's family. There was also some jewelry that I had never seen before. A second letter that was authored by Robert and included a list of their net worth was also received. The value of this item was close to $100,000. Angela drew in a quick breath, and she was aware of the tears that were beginning to pool in her eyes. "Mother, this is the luckiest thing that could have happened to us. We could sell these and use the money to make repairs." Her first impulse was to dispose of the objects and use the money to fill the gaps that Edward had left behind, rather than going through the trouble of preserving the history of the family or honoring Robert's legacy. Despite her wish to do otherwise, she had not yet attained an understanding. I did my role in the performance as I had done in previous times, but I did so with trepidation and uncertainty. "Sweetheart, are you absolutely certain that you want to go through with this? These objects are the precious things that are owned by your father," Angela inquired for clarification. Angela placed her hands on top of each other and stated, "The moment that they leave you, they abandon you for good. They will seize all of my belongings from me if I do not pay off my debt in a timely manner." "Mother, what other options are available to me?" she asked. "Even this house could be in jeopardy," she said, not realizing that this specific house was already protected. "'Cause it was in my name. Give it some serious consideration," I said after taking a big breath. It seemed as though I had made up my mind. She shook her head back and forth several times as a reply. After stating, "I don't have the slightest idea of what else I can do," she began the complex process of translating gems into numbers. For the weeks that followed, going to see jewelers, having talks, and doing cold calculations were the order of the day. Every evening, Angela would go to the kitchen table, and she would lay receipts and documentation out on the surface. Her eyes would lower as she considered which of the debts she owed she would pay off. The engagement ring that Robert had given to me, and a little necklace that had been passed down to her from her grandmother were the only 2 gems that she did not sell. She was able to sell off almost every other diamond. Her final total of $180,000 was lower than the amount that she had hoped for, but it was more than enough money to appease the creditors who had been the most vocal in their opposition. I observed her quietly as she made her decisions, evaluating which loans held the most risks. She had adopted a demeanor that was considerably sterner and more solemn than it had been at any point in the past. The woman who had previously spent her money without giving it a second thought was now very concerned about every cent that she laid down. It was agonizing to watch her condense decades of family history into a lifeline that would guarantee her survival, but it was an absolutely necessary measure. It was of the utmost significance for her to bear the burden of consequence for the things that she did. She needed to comprehend that money was not a mystical substance, and that if it was not kept with care, it might vanish in an instant. I would have made the time to sit down with Mr. Peterson and talk to him over the phone to hear his most recent updates, even though she was completely exhausted. One evening he turned to Brooks and stated, "The debts that Edward has are more extensive than your daughter knows." Among the debts that he owed were more than $200,000. Some of which was acquired through private lenders and a substantial portion of which was obtained through the use of signatures that were fraudulent. "If we press the evidence, we can demonstrate that Angela is not responsible," I stated in response. I experienced a rush of relaxation washing over me as soon as I closed my eyes. "Don't let her know anything about this just yet," I told him in a strong voice. "Let the process play out without any interruptions or disturbances, in silence. It is not until the moment is completely and utterly without flaw that she will be apprised of the information," he declared, demonstrating that he was in agreement with my point of view. I returned to the quiet game that I was playing, which involved pretending to be a mother who was susceptible while simultaneously retaining the hidden authority of a woman who is in control. Angela also had to deal with a situation such as this for the first time in her life during this period of time. She did not have a great credit history, which is why the interviews that she attended were unsuccessful, and as a result, she was unable to find employment. At some point, a small business offered to give her a part-time job that would involve cleaning offices in the evenings. As she was conveying that information to me, she seemed to be experiencing a sense of embarrassment. "Mother, it's not a lot, but it's something," she said. After that, I quietly said, "In any case, I won't be a burden on anyone," and I took her hand in mine as gently as I possibly could. I went to great lengths to disguise the prideful feelings that I was experiencing. My daughter, who had before rejected the notion of putting in a significant amount of effort, was getting ready to scrape the desks and clean the floors. I questioned her in a whisper. "Is it absolutely certain that you are fully confident in your capacity to carry out this task?" Following my inquiry, she emphatically proclaimed that she will investigate the matter further. It was reminiscent of witnessing a phoenix blazing in its own flames to see her leave the house without wearing any makeup or jewelry, dressed in simple clothes, on her way to a profession that she would have sneered at in the past. It is something that must be done, even though it is painful. "Mother, do you remember what she said? There are 2 types of people who work in jobs like this," she went on to explain. "Those who fall into the first category have never been presented with any opportunities, while those who fall into the second category have forfeited the opportunities that they did have." She then asked me which of the 2 categories I occurred to fall into. "I had everything," I informed her, "and I destroyed it all." Tears welled up in her eyes as a result. "At the very least, I am aware of the cause for my presence here," she stated. I noticed the first hint of authentic comprehension in her comments, despite the fact that they were really hard to listen to. It was the first time that my daughter was taking a genuine and earnest look at her life. Angela, on the other hand, continued to hold on to the concept that both of us were women who were disadvantaged and that we were cohabitating and surviving together. The fact that I was the one who was in control of the operation was something that she did not know in the slightest. Furthermore, she was unaware of the fact that the substantial debts that were burdening her were already being dealt with in the background. I made no reference at all to the secret because the lesson had not yet reached its conclusion. One evening, she buried her face in her hands and broke down in sobbing at the kitchen table, unable to contain the feelings that were overwhelming her. "I am the cause of everything that has gone wrong, Mother, and it is all terrible. For the man who abandoned me, I sold everything that was yours, including your memories, your house, and your truck. And now I have brought about your collapse along with my own." After I had gently placed my palm on her shoulder, I murmured, "I do not possess the qualities necessary to be forgiven. My darling, people are not without the capacity to make mistakes." She was sobbing with even greater fervor. "For me, acquiring information from them is the most important thing in the world," she said. "But what is the best course of action for me to take in order to address this dilemma? How is it possible for me to make reparations for the damage that I have caused?" I was looking forward to that moment and had a feeling that it would arrive. Angela was not only going through a very difficult period at the time, but she was also finally looking for a way to make things right, rather than looking for an escape from the situation. On the other hand, the reality of the problem is something that I have not yet revealed. I was fully aware of the fact that I would eventually reveal everything to her by taking the mask off, but all I did was hold her hand and let her cry in the meantime. Over the period of time, I saw Angela as she underwent her gradual transition. She continued to pay off her obligations with the money she earned from the diamonds while she continued to work. The fact that she was thankful for the option to cook her own meals was the reason she started doing so. She did not do so out of a sense that it was her responsibility. She started to speak to me with decency and respect. She treated me as though I were an equal participant rather than as if I were an imposition. She also started putting aside a little percentage of her earnings in order to assist a coworker who was experiencing difficulties with daycare payments. I knew that Robert's plan, as well as mine, was succeeding as a result of those tiny actions. My daughter was not being molded by comfort. Rather, she was being molded by difficulty. She was coming to the realization that it was possible to lose everything and still find a way to continue living her life. She was not aware at the time that I was the one who had assembled the safety net that was situated underneath her feet. I had carefully and quietly waited for the proper opportunity, which would be when she was prepared to uncover the truth, before discreetly and slowly carrying out the plan. Angela would soon come to learn that her mother had never been vanquished, left powerless, or left in the lurch. This is due to the fact that the game will be finished in a short period of time. She would soon come to realize that every single episode of her suffering had been directed by a hand that she had previously believed to be entirely incapable of doing any sort of action, and that the woman who she had left behind her was indeed the one who had kept her from getting hurt. I knew that the curtain was about to fall on the production I had painstakingly planned and produced, but Angela persisted in her belief that we were two impoverished widows who were making every effort to survive. The woman who had come to her aid during the darkest hour of her despair was the same woman who had been abandoned in her wake. When Mr. Peterson finally called, he expressed the words and thoughts that had been on my mind for such a long time, and those words were expressed then. That day eventually arrived. I made a point of addressing her by her name and adding, "Mrs., the process is complete," Brooks said, his voice dripping with a sense of victory and a feeling of ease. "We have all of the evidence that Edward committed forgery in our possession. There is no legal obligation for your daughter to repay any of the debts that he caused her to accrue in her name. There is nothing that she is obligated to pay. As far as Edward is concerned, he is being held in another country." "Angela," I said, "the banks are going to come after him, not her." I felt a sense of gratitude, and I closed my eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Now it's time she learns the truth," I replied to him. I informed Angela that we had made plans to meet on Friday morning, and that I had told her it was an appointment with an attorney who potentially could be of assistance. She halted what she was doing, and her eyes were filled with apprehension. "Mother, I lack the financial means to hire an attorney," I replied, placing my palm on top of hers. "I don't even have enough money to buy groceries," I said. "My sweet, you need not be concerned about that at the moment," I said to her. She made the suggestion that they go together by saying, "Come with me. Let's pay attention to what he has to say," I said, and I was unable to get any sleep for the following 2 nights because I was walking back and forth around my house like a woman who was getting ready to go into combat. I practiced what I would say, how I would explain the truth without gloating, and how I would make her understand that my quiet had not been cruelty but rather love clad in steel. We walked together to Mr. Peterson's office on the Friday of the day that we had been looking forward to for quite some time. Angela was wearing her best clothing, albeit they hung loosely on her body because she had lost weight, when we took our seats across from the lawyer's desk. Her hands, on the other hand, were trembling in her lap as a result of dread. Mrs. With a welcoming smile on his face, he addressed us with the words, "Brooks, Miss Brooks, thank you for coming." When Angela responded, she did it fast and in a way that was nearly on the defensive. Lifting my hand with a gentle motion, I addressed the man by saying, "I have to warn you, sir, that I am not in a position to pay exorbitant legal fees." "Did you have something to say a moment ago? I feel like you were about to say something. There is a great deal of confusion regarding your case. For the time being, we should avoid discussing compensation." As Angela placed a gigantic folder on the desk in front of her, she observed, "Please take a look at this. Now let's talk about some facts," she continued. As she proceeded to peruse the pages of the paper that she had just unfolded, the expression on her face changed in a manner similar to the way that the appearance of storm clouds would transform as they move across the sky. Her response to the situation developed from bewilderment to amazement to the achievement of an understanding. "I am not liable for the debts. There is no need on my side to pay up the responsibilities. According to this, Edward forged my signature." She gazed upward in amazement. Mr. Peterson agreed by nodding his head when asked if it was feasible that this was the genuine article. "Without a doubt, it is genuine and authentic. Our inquiry has been going on for a significant amount of time, several weeks to be exact. You were likewise a recipient of fraudulent behavior. Those debts are no longer a burden for you," Angela screamed as she wept, clutching the papers close to her chest. "Who is able to pay for this? Who is it that employs you?" She shook her head and mumbled, "I didn't do that," as she turned her body to face me. "Mother, did you?" "I do not possess the capability to ascertain the precise location of the item that you are attempting to locate. At the precise moment that our eyes first locked, I relinquished the pretense that I had been maintaining for several months. When I spoke, my voice did not shake at all, and everything I said was easy to understand. It was the voice of the woman who had been entrusted with Robert's trust and confidence. She had thought that I was the distraught widow, but I was not. "I am the person that is responsible for this action," Angela declared. She was taken aback by the things that she had just said, and her eyes grew wide. "Pero, ¿cómo es eso posible? Usted no tiene recursos de dinero en efectivo. Is beyond anything you could have ever envisioned. Everything that pertains to your father's estate, including the documents, the finances, the investments, and the complete record, is displayed here." Angela trembled as she opened the folder and began to scan through the page after page of homes, bank balances, and investments. She was so flabbergasted that her mouth fell open. "This indicates that you are the owner of the building in which I used to live. After admitting the fact that you are the proprietor of extra residences, businesses, and bank accounts, I slowly inclined my head in accord with the statement. Mom. Indeed, Angela, this is evidence that you are affluent. Feel the same way. Ever since your father was around, I have been that way. The coastal house that you were the owner of before this one. It was an object that I possessed, and since then I have taken control of it again. Is the truck that you took the one in question? I have managed to get it back. All of the memories and each and every one of the attributes that you thought you had gotten rid of still exist. They were never gone. I have made it a point to verify that they are secure on a regular basis. I have a responsibility to do so." For what reason did Angela have such a tremulous reaction when she finally set the folder down and closed it? Her eyes locked with mine, and I could feel that she was confused, angry, ashamed, and that she was experiencing another emotion that I had not encountered in a long time: respect. In a low, gravelly voice, she asked the question, "For what reason?" "I am unable to comprehend the reason behind your decision to permit me to undergo pain. What was the reason for you to observe me crying every evening, working myself to the point of exhaustion, selling Dad's jewels, and begging for scraps when you had the ability to resolve everything with just a signature? As I was waiting for this question to come up, I leaned forward and locked my gaze with hers the moment it eventually did. You would have never been able to learn that, Angela, supposing that I had rescued you ahead of time. That is the explanation for it. It would be easy to assume that someone would always be there to clean up your messes and that you would never have to work your way out of a rut. You sold my house, my car, and my memories without giving it a second thought. I tossed you aside without a second thought, treating you as if you were trash. If I had given you money immediately, you would have continued to do it. One more time. Is there anything else you need help with? One day, you would have succumbed to self-destruction as a result of your own arrogance, after I had abandoned you completely. I am permitting you to undergo pain, but I am doing so not as a kind of vengeance but rather as a means of imparting knowledge to you through your experience, in order to prevent you from harming yourself. Angela was in a state of bankruptcy and did not have any financial resources at her disposal at that point in time. This time, her tears were not the cries of despair and self-pity that she had exhibited in the past. She hid her face in her hands and began to cry. On the contrary, she was crying because she was feeling a real sense of agony that originated from her acknowledgement of the reality. I was awful to you, she said, struggling to get the words out of her mouth. I left you in the dust. I was the one who turned my back on you. I was the one who betrayed you. And after that, you went to the rescue of my cause, I retorted, maintaining my train of thought as I reached across the table, took her hand in mine, and carried on speaking. I did it because I am your mother. That is the reason I did it. Love is not always a kind force. In some situations, love must be like steel. Sometimes, love has to allow for pain in order to teach people things that they would never learn if they were comfortable. Her face had undergone a transformation by the time she eventually lifted her head, despite the fact that her eyes were swollen. With the eyes of a woman who was strong and formidable, she glared at me. She had outwitted her, survived the betrayal she had committed, and still decided to guide her back. I was no longer viewed by her as the duty that she had previously portrayed me as. The relationship that we had started to become different in the weeks after that. Angela made the decision to continue working as a cleaner despite the fact that her employment in that capacity was no longer necessary. She informed me, I need to finish what I started, as she was getting ready to go to work one evening. She tied her hair up and said this. It is imperative that I prove to myself that I am capable of becoming self-sufficient and that I am not solely subsisting on your strength. I returned her expression of determination and replied, I am no longer interested in taking the path of least resistance. The arrogance that had previously clouded her perspective had been replaced by a sense of humility and resolve. She no longer possessed that pride. She began to put money to the side. The amounts were small at first, but every dollar was a monument to the hard work that she had accomplished. In addition, she began to offer assistance to other people. For example, she bought groceries for a coworker or paid the daycare fees for the child of another lady. She came to the realization for the first time that being wealthy is not a matter of the things that you own. Rather, it is a matter of the things that you have the power to give to other people. With a voice that was shaking with enthusiasm, Angela said to her mother, Mom, I was accepted into the master's program. She had finally started taking classes in social work at the community college nearest to her, 6 months after her initial goal. I would like to provide any woman who finds herself in the same circumstances that I was in with assistance, which includes being without money, without support, humiliated, and without any other recourse. I embraced her and held her closer than I had held her in years. I want to do something good with my pain, I said. I felt like I could accomplish anything in the world. She had transformed from the selfish daughter who had sold out her family in exchange for a quick payday. Her integrity remained completely unimpaired once she emerged from those experiences, which had purified her into a woman of great dignity. While we were painting the walls and planting flowers in the garden, I had the distinct impression that Robert was looking down on us with a proud smile on his face. It seems that he was content with the legacy that he had left in his wake. We had arrived at a unanimous decision that the beach house would be converted into a sanctuary for women who were fleeing from domestic violence. It would be a place where they could find security and rehabilitation. Mom, I finally understand, Angela said to me in a whisper while taking my hand. It was during that moment that the sun was setting over the river on the porch that he had constructed with his own 2 hands. As I held her hand in mine, I added, "I am going to remember that from now on." By this point, tears had welled up in my eyes, so I was wiping them away. "Angela, the extent of what I have ever wanted you to learn is this. True riches is not measured by money. It is measured by reverence, affection, and family." That evening, while I was sitting alone beneath the stars, I said to Robert, "My dearest, we accomplished our objective. Our daughter has returned to her usual self, and she is now completely well again. Her priorities have changed, and she now has an understanding of what truly matters." I experienced a feeling of tranquility for the first time since his passing. The concept of justice was expressed via transformation rather than through vengeance or punishment. When I closed my eyes, I had the realization that the story was not coming to a conclusion. Rather, it was the dawn of a new chapter. Betrayal and loss were not going to be the foundations of this new beginning. Rather, it was going to be established on strength, dignity, and the unwavering tie that exists between a mother and her kid. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.